The Titans offense going into the 2018 season is something that almost nobody is talking about right now, but I think by the middle of October they are going to be impossible to ignore. I'm a Texans fan myself, so I tend to study the AFC South teams more than most, and when I saw the offensive roster that Tennessee has constructed, combined with the new coaching staff that they just brought in, I immediately thought it was a perfect match. Offensively, they have not had this good of synergy between personnel and system in quite some time, and I really think it's going to result in a massive jump in effectiveness for this unit as a whole. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of this new system though, we first need to understand where Tennessee's new offensive coordinator, Matt LaFleur, comes from in his coaching background and all of the influences that he has learned under. LaFleur is part of the next generation of the Shanahan-Gruden coaching tree, which is arguably the greatest offensive branch of all the branches in the massive, overarching Bill Walsh tree. And I say Shanahan-Gruden because the Shanahan tree and the Gruden tree are basically the same thing, so it's easier just to combine them together and create a single trunk with the same branches. Now, within this tree you obviously have Mike Shanahan and John Gruden at the very top, who were both coaches with their own adaptations of the West Coast system, and they both served as assistants under George Seifert in San Francisco during the early 90s. And Seifert himself was a defensive assistant under Walsh before that, which is where all the original West Coast influences for this whole system come from. Underneath those two legendary names, you have an extremely tangled web of current head coaches, former head coaches, and offensive coordinators who have all worked for or with each other throughout the last 15 years in a multitude of cities. Gary Kubiak was a Mike Shanahan disciple who employed both Kyle Shanahan and Matt LaFleur in Houston in 2008 and 2009. Meanwhile, in Tampa Bay, Jay Gruden worked under his brother John in that same year, while simultaneously also mentoring a very young Sean McVay, who was fresh out of college and in his first year of coaching. McVay then went on to work under both of the Shanahans and Jay Gruden with the Florida Tuskers and Washington Redskins until he got the head coaching job with the Rams. Oh, and LaFleur also worked in Washington during that time after he left Houston, and then followed Kyle Shanahan to Atlanta before working with McVay yet again last season in Los Angeles. And let's not forget about Jeremy Bates, the current offensive coordinator for the Jets, who worked directly under both Mike Shanahan and John Gruden in Denver and Tampa, while Jay Gruden and Kyle Shanahan were his fellow assistants with the Buccaneers in the early 2000s. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Greg Olson too, who is John Gruden's new offensive coordinator with the Raiders. He worked as Jared Goff's quarterbacks coach last year in LA underneath McVay, and ironically he was the offensive coordinator over McVay and Jay Gruden in Tampa 10 years ago when they were all working together on the staff of, you guessed it, John Gruden again. This entire list has worked both over and under each other on 8 different teams, winning a total of 9 Super Bowl rings, and out of all 9 of these coaches, 6 have gone on to be head coaches. It is without a doubt in my mind the greatest offensive football brain trust in the 97-year history of the NFL. This is the legacy that Matt LaFleur comes from, and all of the influences he has been around for the last decade will no doubt shape the system that Tennessee runs this season. So, taking all of that into account, what can we expect this scheme to look like, and why do I believe that it fits the Titans' personnel so perfectly? Let's look at a few of the common pillars among all these adapted philosophies to answer that question. For starters, for most of this coaching tree, the zone run is king. This is more true on the Shanahan and Kubiak side than the Gruden side, but I consider LaFleur to have more Shanahan influences anyway, so this still applies. In this system, you want a slashing running back that can both threaten the edges while still having the ability to bend a run upfield and get some tough yards in a cutback lane if that edge is taken away. In my opinion, that describes Derrick Henry to a T. There is a very common misconception, by the way, that just because Henry is 6'3", 250 pounds, that he's a classic bruiser inside the tackles like Jerome Bettis, and he'll just bulldoze his way through the line of scrimmage, but that is not true at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Henry is a much more effective runner on the edges than inside the tackles, which makes him more ideally suited for a zone run scheme than a gap run scheme. This was also proven both statistically and on tape last season when Mike Mularkey was still trying to force him to become an inside gap scheme runner when his skill set did not fit that system at all. On inside runs last season, Henry had 106 attempts for 346 yards and a terrible 3.26 yards per carry average. On the edges, however, he had 52 attempts for 407 yards. That's a positively monstrous 7.83 yards per carry, well over double what he was getting inside. Over the left edge in particular, Henry was even more effective, rushing for 9.97 yards per carry. He was literally averaging a first down on every touch over the left edge, which is almost unheard of for a back his size. So why is this? Why is someone with Henry's unique build such a beast on the edges, but not inside the tackles where you expect him to thrive? Well, it's not really the reason you might think. Henry's success when bouncing outside is really more due to his arms than his legs, which sounds weird, I know, but kinda just follow me on this for a minute here. His arms are abnormally long for a running back at 33 inches. That's in the 95th percentile for all running backs in the last 20 years, and only 10 runners in total have had longer arms than him in those 2 decades. That arm length is his greatest weapon, because it means he has the length to go along with the power to completely stuff defensive backs and linebackers when they try to cut him down by the legs in space. He's so damn big and strong that you basically have to try to wrap him up down low or he'll never go down, but with his insanely long reach, more often than not he's able to catch and deflect those tackles with the stiff arm and just throw people to the dirt before they can even get close. He turns his biggest weakness on its head over and over and over again when he's running outside, and it's remarkable to watch because you rarely see someone who is this good at protecting themselves from low hits to the legs. Sometimes it doesn't even matter if the defense has forced players in a good position to contain him, that stiff arm is so nasty that he can just break through contain anyway and take the edge by force. And since the outside zone run game that the Shanahans have used for forever is so intent on getting the running back to the edge, having a ball carrier that can thrive on the edges like this with that stiff arm is a huge benefit. It means that rather than just trying to force a square peg into a round hole, the entire system will be actively working towards putting their bell cow into his comfort zone. If they can get Henry to the edges more often than Malarkey did, I promise you he will put up some truly stupid numbers in this scheme. It's just bound to happen. All of that being said though, I also think that not only will Henry thrive on those outside zone runs when he gets to the edge, but to me, I think that his style of cutbacks will also benefit from the shift to a zone system. Henry is a one-speed, momentum-based runner. He does not work well when trying to stop, start, and sift his way through traffic at the line of scrimmage. He's not Devontae Freeman or Le'Veon Bell after all, who can both kind of just improvise and make stuff happen with bodies flying all around them. Once he picks a direction, he's going that direction, so Henry doesn't really cut back so much as he just bends his runs back in order to preserve that momentum. His cuts, if you want to call them that, are typically more rounded because his center of gravity is so high, because with a high center of gravity, it's really hard to just change directions on a dime. Whenever Henry does try to stop and jump cut his way from hole to hole, it completely compromises whatever inertia he built up, and he gets basically no power out of his legs. When he rounds the cut, however, and takes on more of a bending style, he's able to keep his speed consistent, so his momentum keeps building, and he's really able to bring the full force of that 250-pound frame to bear. That bending style is perfect for a zone run game, which is by nature more lateral than purely downhill, and it's why he was so successful in the zone scheme that Alabama used. When you're moving east-west to start a run instead of north-south, it gives you a few extra steps to build up speed, and the cuts typically are not as sudden because all you have to do is just read the leverage of the outside defender and decide if you need to bend your angle to his inside hip or his outside hip. Sure, you'll see zone runners like Arian Foster, LaShawn McCoy, or Dalvin Cook really put their foot in the ground and make these super violent cutbacks, and they'll get all the way to the backside, but that's not necessarily a required skill set for this system. With Henry's momentum and power, he doesn't have to find open space on the backside edge. He can just subtly bend his angle from the play side B gap to the play side A gap to the backside A gap as he's reading all of these defender leverages and do just fine without compromising any of his speed or power. So really, to make a long point short, Derrick Henry is not some typical battering ram that you just run ISO with all day long and watch him beat people up. Unless the hole is literally open for him right when he gets to the line, he doesn't have the footwork to improvise and still get yards when those ISO runs don't get blocked perfectly. That's not what he's good at just from a physical skill set standpoint, and the Titans trying to force him into that playstyle was a total waste of his talent. He was born to be a zone runner, and for the first time since his Heisman winning campaign at Alabama, he's back in his natural habitat. Now, taking all of that into account while we process the changes to the run game, how is this going to impact Marcus Mariota in the passing game? We all know that the Shanahan-Gruden coaching tree, regardless of their different run scheme preferences, all preach the gospel of the play-action pass. But what will that look like with the Titans' unique personnel in a brand new system? Personally, I expect that a lot of the play call progressions will be ripped directly from LaFleur's time in Washington when he and Kyle Shanahan had a mobile quarterback in RG3 and a pure zone running back in Alfred Morris. And ironically, a lot of those same concepts from those days with RG3 were used by Lane Kiffin at Alabama when Henry was still on campus. So just for the sake of being thorough while doing my research for this episode, I did dust off my own copies of some old Shanahan playbooks just to get caught up on some of their terminology so I could translate Kiffin's system with Henry to the Shanahan and LaFleur systems. And here's what I came up with while doing that. We're going to take another play from that 2015 Mississippi State-Alabama game as an example. I'm not sure what McVay or LaFleur or Kyle Shanahan would call this concept under their current terminologies because they're all very different, but every single one of them runs like 5 versions of this play, so I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing it a lot this year. At least under the old school Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak terminology that I studied, this concept would likely be called pistol double offset wing right 19 zoom. Again, I can't confirm that's what they call it now because I have no idea what all their different terminologies are in 2018, and nobody was even using the pistol 15 years ago, but back then that's what the play call would probably have been named if it did exist. So, pistol double offset wing right 19 zoom. Pistol meaning the quarterback and running back are in a pistol alignment, double offset wing right meaning the tight end is in a wing on the right side of the offensive line, offset from the line of scrimmage of course. 19 zoom is the play itself, with the number 19 being the number for an outside zone run call to the left. For instance, 18 would be an outside zone call to the right side because odd numbers are left and even numbers are right. And the zoom part of the call is having the Z receiver, Calvin Ridley, run a sweep action opposite of the run to try to pull some defenders away from the front side of the play. So, 19 zoom, just to recap, is an outside zone call to the left with a fake sweep to the right from the Z. After the snap, as you probably expected, you can see Henry using that unique style of his to build up speed, bend his angle inside of the block from Cam Robinson, and preserve that momentum for him to lay a big hit on 3 defenders and get 4 additional yards through contact. That's what the Titans' run game is probably going to look like in a nutshell if they structure their offense how I expect them to, and the play action calls off of that will no doubt be the most effective part of their passing game. Using this same alignment and concept, the play call progression for a pass off of this run would be called pistol double offset wing right fake 19 zoom QB keep. For simplicity's sake, I'll use the exact same defensive alignment that Mississippi State was just in. They were in a 4-man overfront with a 3 deep shell on the back end. The typical play action pass that you progress to off of that run would actually work really well against this defensive play call because it perfectly exploits their zones in the secondary. The linebackers would be flowing really hard to the front side to try to stop Henry from getting the edge on the fake because, well, as we showed before, they kind of have to, and that movement from the backers opens up the Z receiver in the flat to be wide open for some big yardage after the catch, which for reference would likely be Taywan Taylor for Tennessee. Marcus Mariota would be rolling out on the bootleg in this direction as well, so it would be an easy throw to Taylor, and if for some reason that easy throw underneath was covered, he has the speed to just get some good yards with his legs. Meanwhile, you've got the X receiver running a clear out route to move this deep third corner out of the way in his zone, which totally opens up this area of the field for the Y receiver on the deep over route, so that's also a good easy chunk play if it's there. Mariota would obviously be working a deep to short progression as he's rolling out, so he has 3 simple and defined reads to choose from. The deep over route first, and then the check down to the flat, and if both of those are not there, just keeping it himself. And if LaFleur really wants to get fancy after a couple of those bootlegs hit for big plays, he can always set up a boot throwback screen the other direction to Henry. Once those linebackers and defensive linemen get apprehensive about the rollout, you hit them with another bootleg, wait for them to disengage and chase, and then turn and throw it to Henry against the grain of the play with a convoy of blockers out in front of him. We've already seen what Henry can do as a receiver on a screen pass once he builds up momentum, so don't think for 1 second that LaFleur isn't thinking of ways as we speak to get him the ball in the pass game. This whole play call progression is just a very small part of what I think this new Titans playbook is going to be, and I'm excited because in a way we've already seen what it's capable of in Washington, Atlanta, Los Angeles, and Alabama. As a football fan and as an avid fantasy football player, I'm super stoked to see what happens in Tennessee because their arrow as an offense has not pointed this far north in a long time. They have the perfect running back duo for this system in Henry and Dion Lewis, who stylistically is a great changeup to Henry and will probably take over third down duties immediately. They have a receiver in Corey Davis, who I think is a natural fit at their X position, which traditionally is a big part of the Shanahan, Kubiak, McVay-ish type of system. They have an excellent receiving and blocking tight end in Delaney Walker, who's probably one of the most underrated players of the last decade. They've got an offensive line that I think, while not being among the elite of the elite, is certainly good enough to thrive in this scheme, and most important of all, they have a quarterback with the mobility to present a whole different set of problems for defenses when he's out in space on these bootlegs. I could not think of a better fit between offensive philosophy and personnel for this Titan squad in 2018, and when you also factor in some of the additions they've made on defense, Malcolm Butler, Harold Landry, and Rashaan Evans in particular, this Tennessee roster is ready to rock and roll right now. They're a playoff-ready team this year, and people are sleeping on them way too hard. I know that the AFC South is going to be one of the toughest divisions in football, especially with the Jags still there and the super talented Texans coming back fully healthy for once, and potentially even Andrew Luck making his return to the Colts this season. But hard division or not, I still think that the Titans are going to be making noise in January. As long as Mariota doesn't get hurt again, they'll be right in the mix with everyone else. Whether they can challenge the Patriots, Steelers, and Chargers for supremacy over the AFC, I don't know just yet, but this is a talented enough team that I refuse to count them out right now. We are definitely going to find out if they're for real early on in the year though, because in that first month alone, they've got big time matchups with Miami, Houston, Jacksonville, and Philadelphia. If they come out of that stretch with a positive record, let alone a positive division record, watch the hell out, because that means nobody, and I mean nobody, is safe from this team. So if you're watching this as a Titans fan, congratulations. On paper at least, you've got a really damn good ball club. And if you're watching this because you just drafted Derrick Henry in your fantasy league and you want to feel better about it, congratulations. You just got a really damn good fantasy running back too. I obviously cannot guarantee that Tennessee will be as good as I expect them to be on the field, or that your second round pick will justify his ADP. But in the summer doldrums of June, when we have nothing to go on but tape study, roster analysis, and speculation, there is a hell of a lot to be excited about here. So soak it up while you can, Nashville. Have a celebratory dinner of hot chicken tonight, because you just got this Texans fan, and all other fans around the NFL, to be excited about watching your team for once. I know it's been quite a while since the Titans were last considered must-see TV, so as you go into this season, just know, I'll be thinking about you. And for your sakes, all of your sakes, I sincerely hope that 2018 was worth the wait. Thank you very much for watching this week's episode, and of course for being patient with last week's episode while we wait for my last video on the Eagles to kind of go through all the processes it needs to go through to get reinstated. I won't get too much into it here, but the short version of the story is that it was a bogus copyright claim by someone who was pretending to be the Eagles. It was not actually the Eagles, and it had no real legal standing, so I just kind of have to wait for the counter notice to go through and for the video to come back after all that stuff is done. It's not a real difficult process or anything like that. You just kind of have to play the waiting game. So it's not really a big deal. It should be back up soon, maybe even by the time this video is posted, depending on what day I post this. But anyway, thank you everyone for the support. Thank you for the support you guys have given me on Patreon, of course, if I can pronounce it correctly. You guys are helping me pay my rent and keeping this channel going. And it's again, another month. It's been truly incredible, the support you guys have given me. I plan to do another Q&A soon just for patrons exclusively, and of course sometime after the 4th of July I'll start pumping out some fantasy content for all of you, again just for the patrons, so stay tuned for that. We've got a lot of stuff coming up here in the next couple months. I'm super excited to share all of that with you guys, and I'll be back soon with another episode, so until then, later.